Hey there, I'm Jeff Elkins, and this is the Dialogue Doctor Podcast! Hey, so that I was upstairs and I was hanging out with my family, and I told them tonight I'm recording the 300th episode. It's something I've known for a while because I've been working on these slides for a while and talking about them, and they were like, "We want to participate." So that was my family in the intro, all excitedly cheering for the 300th episode. It wasn't everybody. I got two kids in college that are not in town right now, but it was my three kids that are here, and my wife, and the dog even jumped in there in the end. So I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, and I was really honored that they wanted to participate. That was very sweet. I was very excited about that. Okay, so like I said, this is the 300th episode, and it's going to be a little different than we normally do. This is going to be a solo episode. I'm just going to teach in this one. And so I've been doing this now for 5.5 years. I've coached over 300 writers one-on-one. I have, and it's the number is actually way bigger than that. I usually have like three coaching sessions a week, 3 or 4 coaching sessions a week. And we've done we've done 300 episodes. So yeah, it's way bigger than that. But yeah, I've coached a lot of authors one-on-one. I've edited a lot of novels. I've written a bunch of novels myself, um, and I've got two amazing coaches that work with me too, JP and Laura, who help me think through things and process things, and who come up with theories and tools on their own. So in this 5.5 years, we have built a lot of ideas and a lot of tools about how to write, how to create amazing stories that hook readers and create incredible characters and write amazing dialogue. So I've done, yeah, and in my head, over the last 5.5 years, all of these ideas and tools and theories are all a linear line. They all are like one conversation that in my head I've been having about writing. Um, and so, but I don't ever share that full conversation because it's a lot. And so we just do it like one thing at a time. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you into my head, and I'm going to share with you the full conversation. Um, and I'm calling it the Dialogue Doctor DNA. And what this includes is all of our ideas, all of our theories, all of the tools we've built to date from start to finish. Um, I don't know how long this is going to take me. I have like five keynote speeches I give, 5 or 6 keynote talks I give. They're each an hour long, and this is built off of those, and then there's also material in here that isn't in those talks. So if I really went in depth and I like dug in with examples and everything like I do in a talk, if I was like coming to talk to your writers group or I was like speaking at a conference, this would probably take like 8 to 9 hours. So we're not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you kind of the overview. We're going to look down on it. I'm going to try to keep this to an hour. We will see how I do. But I'm going to give you the overview so you can see how everything pieces together. And I also hope this will kind of work as a primer for people that are new to the podcast, because there'll be times where I'm like on a episode and all of a sudden I'm talking to somebody about like, yeah, so you did that in a dialogue draft and your vehicle's really strong, but you need an engine in the scene. And, maybe we can play with these tags a little bit. And as I'm talking to writers who are in the community on the podcast, I'm like, I know that the person I'm talking to knows all those words, but does the person listening know all those words? Because you kind of have to know the Dialogue Doctor DNA to get all those words. So, Dialogue Doctor DNA, we're going to go through it, every piece. I'm going to give you the 40,000 foot view. Like I said, I'm not going to get nitty gritty into details. I'm just going to give you the big picture. And if you are a part of the community, if you subscribe to the community, patreon.com/dialogue facebook.com/Jeff Elkins, Elkins, or you can go to dialoguedoctor.com and click on the community button. If you're a part of the community, you'll get a copy of these slides when you get the episode in Patreon. So, whew, it's a lot. Are you ready? Again, I apologize in advance. I haven't practiced this, so I have no idea how long it's going to take. So, here we go. We're going to start with theory. Um, we're going to do this in two parts. We're going to do the big picture theory, and then after we do the big picture theory, then we're going to dig into the mechanics and how it works. So theory is going to be kind of lofty ideas and thinking to kind of center us. And then mechanics is going to be the nitty gritty on the page. What are we doing there? To kick off the theory, the most important thing and the foundation of everything we talk about at the Dialogue Doctor is that your story is an emotional journey. When you tell a story, whether you are writing a screenplay or a novel or a short story or a nonfiction book, you are taking the consumer of the story on an emotional journey, right? You are walking them through this emotional path. And that's the core of everything we're talking about. So everything we're talking about is built off this idea of how can we at the Dialogue Doctor, me and the other two coaches, how can we help you create the emotional story that's in your imagination and take the reader on that emotional journey. So at the heart of your story is a vehicle character. Your vehicle character is everything. Why am I calling it a vehicle? Well, a lot of times when we're talking about a main character, we use the phrase protagonist and antagonist, but these are plot-centric terms, right? The protagonist is for a positive ending to the conflict in the story. The antagonist is looking to bring about the opposite of the positive ending of the conflict in the story. Those words aren't so helpful when we're thinking about an emotional journey because what if my main character is the antagonist? Does that mean I have to feel bad in the end if they succeed in bringing about what would be the moral negative of the conflict in the story? Not necessarily. There are a lot of great books, a lot of great storytelling where the antagonist of the plot is the main character that we hugely sympathize with. Um, so we just and the protagonist, what about stories that the conflict's never resolved, or stories where it's just complicated, but we still love them, and they take us on this incredible, beautiful journey. So what about those stories that may not have a traditional protagonist? I find these words, protagonist and antagonist, really helpful if we're writing like superhero stories or like action thrillers. They're really helpful. But outside of that, they don't help. So we don't want to start with protagonist or antagonist. We want to start with vehicle because it's emotionally journey centric. The vehicle is the main character that our reader is going to be journeying with. It is usually the POV, not always, but usually the POV, and your vehicle has to have a growth arc. So, why characters above world building or plot? Right? Because those are the other two places I hear writers start all the time. Like, oh my gosh, I have this amazing world in mind. Or like, oh my gosh, I've got this incredible plot. So I want you to think of this like your story is you explaining a vacation you took to the reader. Um, Now, when I talk about like, okay, I took my kids to New York one time, which is a vacation I talk about a lot because it's great for a later illustration. I'm probably not going to do, but a later illustration in the mechanics section. So when I talk about taking my kids to New York, I talk about, them being awe-inspired and them was walking the streets and how they were feeling at the moment and what their responses to things were and how amazing, encountering these people was and seeing these tall buildings. And I talk about how we, the group on the vacation, were impacted by what we saw. That's the heart of my story, how I and my children were impacted by the city of New York. That's the story, right? That is what happened. The plot is the list of activities we do. So we took a ferry over, we walked to Times Square, we went to Bryant Park, and then we went to see the we went to Hamilton's grave, we rode the subway, right? Like those are the events. But the events are just the things we did. The story is how we were changed and moved by it. And then the world building would be where we went. We went to New York, right? Like if you were like, hey, tell me about your vacation, I was like, we went to New York. It's not a great story. If you're like, tell me about your vacation, I give you a list of activities we did. That's not a great story. But if you asked me to tell you about my vacation, I was like, oh my gosh, we the minute we walked into Times Square, this Spider-Man came running up to us, and my son was so freaked out by it. Now I have a story, right? Now I have a story. So your character growth is that's why we're centering on the emotional journey and the vehicle character because that is your story. Um, and that's where the reader finds themselves in this journey, right? The plot are the steps along the way. The world building is the scenery we're seeing as we're taking the story, and the growth is the journey. I'm hammering this hard because it's at the basis of everything we do, right? Understanding that your story is character centric and emotional and an emotional journey you're taking the reader on is so important. Everything we're going to bring back plot, we're going to bring back world building, we'll bring all that back, but this is what's important at this moment. But as we kick off this journey together, your vehicle character is the center of everything. So there's four types of vehicle characters. And those of you who've heard me teach on this before, you're like, no, Jeff, there's six types of vehicle characters. I'm changing it. I'm changing things. These ideas are always evolving, right? Like, and as I use these tools, because there's four types of vehicle characters, two ways vehicles change. As I use these tools with writers that I'm coaching, I find that this is how I talk about it more. I don't talk about five types of vehicle characters. I talk about, hey, there's four types of characters, and then they change in these two ways. So, four types of vehicle characters. There's your lead vehicle. That's your like basic main character that like the story really does follow their growth arc. They're in most of the scenes. We see them all the time. Then there's supporting vehicles. These are vehicles that just show up on occasion. They're not really driving the story. They kind of feel like a side character who every once in a while gets moments of their own perspective. So those are supporting vehicles. We include them here in supporting vehicles because remember, all of your vehicles need a growth arc, right? All of your vehicles have to change in some way during the story. So lead vehicles, right, are like your main characters. Supporting vehicles are the ones you're just popping in every once in a while. A lot of times I'll catch authors throwing in a supporting vehicle for like one scene. They'll give POV to a single character, and I'll have to stop them and be like, all right, we need at least one more or two more scenes where we see this supporting vehicle change because you've given them perspective. So now they need to change. Anyway, chorus vehicles are a group of characters that all represent one change arc. So if you think like in the Social Network, the movie, there's the twins and then their friend who originally commissioned the Mark Zuckerberg character to create Facebook. They function as a vehicle character because they have perspective, but they're interchangeable. The three of them are interchangeable because they have a single growth arc. Their function as a single character. We're using the word chorus in like the Greek sense there is like the chorus vehicle as the chorus of people on the stage in an ancient Greek uh, drama who all spoke with a single voice. And then there's the third party vehicle, and this one's tricky. This is like that omniscient narrator. So, and they also need to have some form of change and growth during the story. So you get like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has one of these. The Book Thief by Mark Zuckus is narrated by Death. It's got another one of these. We've got this omniscient third party standing over top of the story, talking about the story. They are a vehicle because they have perspective and the reader is on a journey with them through. Or just recently, I did a an article for the Dialogue Doctor community on a scene in the Dutch house. And I talked about in the scene how there's Danny. I think the character's name is Danny, who's a character in the narrative whose life we follow, but the story is being told by Danny from the future, and Danny from the future is actually a third-party vehicle who has a little bit different voice and a little bit different growth arc than Danny, who's actually in the story. So those are the four types of vehicles. Now, there's two ways they change. There's vehicles that change. These are the ones that we follow the typical pattern. we think of, they're going to start at one place and end in a different place, right? So these vehicles have a change, they have a growth arc. It's the most common and by far the most compelling type of character is the character vehicle that changes. The other type of way vehicles change or change functions, sorry, the other way a vehicle change functions, I told you I didn't practice this beforehand, is symbolic vehicles. So symbolic vehicles start and end the story in the same place, right? They are challenged to change during the story. We do have movement of their growth arc, but they start and end the same, right? Like, and they represent typically these characters need to represent a worldview, right? Like, so, Sherlock Holmes is a great example of this. Typically, Sherlock Holmes starts and ends in the same place. He is Sherlock at the beginning of the story and Sherlock at the end of the story. In the middle, his worldview is challenged, his emotions are challenged, he is challenged to be somebody different, but he usually comes back to who he was before. Um, and so we call that a symbolic vehicle, and he kind of represents science and the scientific mind in this usually placed in a past when that worldview is just new and emerging on the scene, right? Like so, or another one that's always thrown at me because whenever I was like, your vehicle has to change, people are always like, what about Jack Reacher? Jack Reacher doesn't change. In every book, he's challenged to change. But yes, he always starts and ends in the same place. And the worldview he represents is American militarism, right? Like, so you get these symbolic vehicles that kind of align with a worldview. They do change through the story, but they start and end in the same place, so it feels like they don't. So vehicles always change. There's two ways they change. They're either starting into different places, most common, most compelling type of vehicle, or you can write a symbolic vehicle that starts and ends at the same place. It represents a worldview, and that representing the worldview is really important because the readers who like that vehicle tend to like that worldview, right? So that's why it's important that vehicle represents a worldview. Um, Okay, now that we have the type of vehicles we're writing, right? Like let's say we're writing a story, we got a lead vehicle who's the main character of the story, then we've got a couple supporting vehicles too thrown in there. Every vehicle, we need to think about their character voice. So in order to help us understand character voice, we designed what's called the dialogue daisy. So the dialogue daisy is our flower illustration, and it's got roots, stems, and then the bud of the flower. So the roots we talk about is the background, the character background, right? This includes things like place and culture and past events and wounds and genetics. It's the character's identity, their ethnicity, their gender, their nationality, their socioeconomic status. It's the character's position in their family. It's the major events that happened in their life before the story starts. And now the key with the background is that of the components, the background, personality, voice, it's the least important. Um, Even though we spend the most time on it, for those of us that are plotters, we spend the most time on the background, even though it's the least important. Uh, it's everything that happened before the story. And the key isn't just that we know our character's ethnicity, gender, nationality, socioeconomic status, but it's also that we need to understand how that functions in the world our character is in. So, how does the culture our character exists in respond to our character's ethnicity? And how does our character feel about that response? How do they respond to gender? How does our character feel about that response? How does the world see our character's birth order? And how does our character understand the birth order? So we're not just listing facts. We're not just building like a Bible of facts. We're really trying to explore who is our character before the story starts. This is the background. We talk about this as the roots of the daisy because this isn't something the reader encounters right away, right? Like the reader, when the reader goes to look at the flower that is your character, they don't reach their hands in the soil, dig up the roots, turn the flower upside down, and go like, "Oh my gosh, amazing roots." I mean, maybe they do, but that's not people who typically look at flowers. So the background's something that's hidden, but it becomes a foundation that we build off of. So from the background, we bring out the personality. Now, I'm using the word personality because that's how we talk about our characters, but you need to understand that when you're writing fiction, creating a personality is different than personality in the real world. In the real world, the personality may include like somebody's personality may include like their strengths, or like I'm a big Strengths Finder fan. Go back in time, may include their like strengths and what those strengths are. It engages. I really like the Enneagram. Go Claire Taylor. And I understand like the Enneagram's fantastic for kind of understanding the kind of what bucket you fall in as a personality and where the weaknesses and temptations are for your personality. You might use Myers-Briggs. All of this, I'm going to boil down to like in a real life, it's very complicated. It's very difficult to understand. There's a big question between like nature and nurture and how that works out. In fiction land, when we're creating fiction, what we're really looking for is a set of adjectives that describe our character. And the way I usually find those adjectives is I say, because of the background, because of the roots of our daisy, this is the stem that has grown. So, because of the roots of our daisy, because everything that happens to this character is now, and list out as many adjectives as you want. This character is shy, reserved, cynical, judgmental. Like just put it all on the wall. All of the adjectives. This character struggles with anger. This character is hurt in this way, right? Like throw it all on the wall. And we get all of those adjectives out. We put them all out on the wall. And then I want you to narrow them down to like 3 to 4 per character because we're going to use those adjectives to design the character voice, which is the most important part of your character is the character voice because it's what the reader engages with. So we're going to use those adjectives, and more than 4 becomes too hard. Now, here's the catch. If you list like 40 adjectives for your character, like, oh my gosh, I have this huge complex backstory. I've written like 45 pages on my character's backstory, and I've got like all of these big charts and everything that I gave them the Myers-Briggs test. I've got their like, letters and I've got their Enneagram number and I've got their strengths and I've got all of this stuff. And I'm only going to narrow it down to 4. I promise all of your knowledge, all of the things that you've built in that character, everything you've done is going to come into play when you write because it's all inside of you. So as you write, it's going to come out, but it's too much to build a voice out of. It's too much to pick on to put on the page. 3 to 4 adjectives is all you need. So once you get those 3 to 4 adjectives out, then we want to start building character voice. Um, and the character voice, again, is how that personality is displayed on the page. So you can see how our daisy grows. It starts in the roots of the background. The character's background created a firm foundation. The stem grows out of the background as the personality, and the bud comes out of the stem as the voice. Now, here's the deal, though. Here's the chief secret we tell everybody. You don't have to do it in this order. Right. A lot of times I'll know the personality of my character, or I might even know the voice of my character before I have any idea who the character is in the background. Right. Like I will know how my character sounds. And then from how my character sounds, I'll work out the personality. And then I'll ask myself, okay, because of this personality, what is this character experienced? Right. Like, or I've written characters where I don't even know the background. I don't, I don't know. A lot of times when I'm coaching somebody, if you watch me coach in an episode, I won't ask, give me the character's background. I'll just say, give me the personality, what personality you're going for, right? Because I can build the voice off the personality. I don't know everything that needs to go back. But if we want a strong, complex, kind of beautifully designed flower that our reader is going to really be enchanted with, we want all these things to align. We want the personality to have grown from the background, and we want the voice to be an expression of the personality. Um, so when we talk about character voice, we talk about 5 components. Language, the language they use, or the words that they speak. Are they big words or small words? Do they have phrases that they use a lot? Are they complex? The topics that they talk about. Um, do they talk about themselves a lot? Do they talk about other things? Are they obsessed with the human head weighs 8 pounds? Are they obsessed with like little weird facts like that? Like, what are the topics that the character talks about? The body language the character uses, and I have to say this every time. We often think of body language as a way to express emotion, and it is a way to modulate. We'll get into modulation in part 2. But we often think of it that way, but the body language is actually an expression of personality first, and then the body language modulates to express emotion. So, how does a person with this personality, how do they move through the world, right? Like a shy person puts their hands in their pockets and looks down. A bubbly, effervescent person talks with their hands and engages all the time and likes to hug, right? Like, so the body language, how does that body language function as part of your character's voice? Cadence, or we'll also call this syntax from time to time, which is the construction of your character's utterances on the page. So a character's utterance is a single participation in a conversation. It may or may not have a vocalization, right? It might be nonverbal participation, but how is that utterance structured? Do they talk? Are their vocalizations rambly? Do they have a lot of commas and they just say the same thing over and over again? And it's just a run-on sentence and it never seems to stop? Or do they just talk in single sentences with periods? They keep it short, right? Like, how does do they just speak one sentence? Or do they speak a whole ton of sentences? Like, what are they doing? What are you doing with their cadence, with their syntax? And the last one is pacing. This is how often they participate in a conversation. How often do they vocalize? How often are they nonverbal? How often do they jump into a conversation when more than two people are talking, right? Like, what is their participation in a conversation as they're pacing? When we think about our Daisy, we think about how the reader experiences these things. Personality is the last thing the reader is thinking about because ideally you never have to tell the reader this is the character's personality. So when we think about how our reader experiences our character, personality is final. But then number three, the third way they experience our character is backstory, because we'll unveil parts of the backstory as we're telling the story. Now, it's not how they meet our character. It's not how they get to know our character. You don't get to know the character through the backstory, but the backstory is unveiled as the story goes along. So by the time we start unveiling the backstory, the reader already kind of has an opinion of who our character is. Number two is physical expression, right? The second way, second most important way your reader experiences your characters through physical expression. Now, but what I mean by that is like how the character looks. So, especially if you do it early in the story, right? Like if you don't do it early in the story, then physical expression is left up to the reader. But if you do it early in the story, the reader kind of gets an image in their head based on your description of the characters and how they look, and that becomes part of the way the reader defines the character in their imagination. But you only really get to do it once, maybe twice. If there's a big moment of character change, you can use a change in physical expression to illustrate that climax of character change. This is a silly example, but I always think of Rambo, the cartoon. When I was growing up, there was a cartoon on TV for Rambo, and right before he went to battle, there'd always be a moment where he like put his boots on and he put the red bandana, the red like I don't even know. It wasn't even a bandana. It was just like a piece of cloth he tied around his forehead. He'd tie that around his forehead, getting to change the physical expression to like express a moment of climactic modulation in the character. And then the last one, the most important one, the number one way your reader is going to experience your character is through the character voice. That is the most important thing. And that's why we focus on it so much. That's why we talk about the five components of character voice. That's why the Daisy builds to the voice. Everything is about the voice because the voice is the way on every page your reader will encounter your character's voice. The voice is the most important thing that your reader is diving into. So when we're thinking about if you want to prioritize what you're focusing on when you build a character voice is your top priority. You need to have a voice down and understand what it feels like and sounds like. Physical expression is number two. Backstory is number three. Personality is number four. Now, personality in development actually gets bumped up a little bit because although your reader doesn't experience it directly, they do see it through the character voice, and the voice is an expression of that personality. So it's important to know. So let me summarize the Daisy real quick because the Daisy is important. We're going to build that background, which are the roots of our Daisy. That background, the personality, how we build the personality is we ask the question of, because of everything that's happened before, who is this character? and we want three to four solid adjectives. And then from that personality, we then ask, how does this personality sound? How do these three to four adjectives sound? And we're going to break that into language, topics, body language, cadence, and pacing. And now you have a way to write your character that will communicate the personality you have in your head, the character in your imagination, and will translate that character to the reader's imagination. Um, so once we have our character voice built, and I've got a sample character here on the screen. If you're watching, if you're listening, it's fine. I'll just tell you. The character is curious, thoughtful, quirky, and lost. Those are the four adjectives I came up for. Once we have our character voice built, we have our character designed, then we want to think about our character's potential. What is the best version of our character and what is the worst version of our character? Right? If the character is going to grow and change, and again, we're talking about vehicles that are not symbolic vehicles, because the symbolic vehicle is just going to come back to curious, thoughtful, quirky, and lost. But you still want to know the potential of your character because through the story, you're going to challenge even a symbolic vehicle to change. So we want to know best version of our vehicle, worst version of our vehicle. And for this vehicle, I said the best version is curious, thoughtful, quirky, and purposeful, not lost. The worst version is defeated, thoughtful, quirky, and lost. Can you see how this is an easy way to develop potential for a character? Just change one of the adjectives, right? Now you have a path for character growth. Just change one adjective. You don't need to change a bunch of adjectives. I will tell you, the more adjectives you change, the longer your story is going to be. Talk about a little bit later, but the more adjectives you change, the more you have to walk the reader through those steps of change in your character. So the longer your story becomes. Often, when I coach characters in a series, we'll say, like, okay, in the first series, we're starting as curious, thoughtful, quirky, and lost. And then at the end of the first book, we're going to have a positive growth arc. So we're going to do curious, thoughtful, quirky, and purposeful. And then in the next one, we're going to have another positive growth arc. So maybe we'll do curious, thoughtful, fun loving, and purposeful. And then we're going to have a negative growth arc. So then we're going to do defeated, thoughtful, fun loving, and purposeful, right? Like, so each book in the series, you can change an adjective. Quick tip that I didn't actually intend to talk about. I'm going into more detail. We're verging on the 8 hours. I got to stay focused. So, character potential. You want to know the best and the worst version of your character. And then once we know the best and worst version of our character, we want to start thinking about what is going to be the path through my story that the character takes. Now, JP, one of our coaches, developed this fantastic system called the story hypothesis, where you think about your character's initial want and then your character's developing need and your character's true need. So the initial want would be kind of the personality that we start in, the true need would be the personality we end in, the developing need would be like how we're walking through that change. One of the things that JP really found when he studied story was that in multiple vehicle stories, where you have multiple vehicles, there needs to be a single hypothesis. So JP uses initial want, developing need, and true need. He uses max needs to define these, but what you're looking for are buckets that your reader's going to fall in. So, like maybe their initial want is community, their developing need is security, and then their true need is identity. Right now, we could have multiple growth arcs in those buckets, but if we want a multiple vehicle story, the themes of the story, and that's what this is about. The story hypothesis is all about finding themes because your themes come out of your character growth. The themes of the story are going to come from aligning your character's growth arcs into these buckets. Those buckets become the themes of the story. So, story hypothesis, fantastic book. You can read more about it. I'm not going into detail. I'm not going to do 8 hours. All right. So now that we have our character voice, our character potential, and our themes kind of starting to be set up, now we can bring back in our plot. And here we can bring in our plot and our genre tropes, right? But because we're focusing on crafting an emotional journey, we want to get that character developed, our vehicle character developed first. We want to think about the journey they're going to go on emotionally. And now we can bring back in the steps of that journey and what those steps look like. So when you combine when you combine the emotional journey, the growth arc of your vehicles with the plot, You get the emotional shape of your story. This was inspired by a video, a talk that Kurt Vonnegut did a couple times around the emotional shapes of story. And listening to the first time I heard it, my mind was like, I think it was probably 10 years ago. My mind exploded. I was like, oh my God, stories have a shape. A lot of times when we talk about genre, like, oh, romance readers like these tropes and sci-fi readers like these tropes, what we're actually explaining is the emotional shape of the story. Romance readers like these growth arcs with these plot beats that creates the emotional shape of this story in this way, right? Like, so that's when we talk about genre tropes, that's what we're talking about is, hey, this group of readers likes this emotional shape. Um, so again, your emotional shape is your growth arc plus your plot, and we often graph this, not I don't do like number graphs. So I'm like, all right, so this is a +1 and this is a +7. That becomes those numbers are relative anyway. Doesn't matter. It's like whose line is it anyway? Numbers don't matter. But at the top on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we want to do positive feeling and negative feeling. Well, whose feeling is this? This is the reader's feeling. I don't actually care how the character feels. I want to know how the reader is going to feel as they're reading the story. And positive growth in general brings positive feeling. Negative growth brings negative feeling, right? But you can also bring negative feeling in other ways. You can bring positive feeling in other ways. We're going to talk about that in the mechanics section. But we're talking about theory. Know that on the y-axis, we have positive and negative feeling of the reader. And then on the x-axis, we have the start of the story and the end of the story. And so you can kind of shape your story that way. So like your typical hero's journey kind of has a rising hill that then falls into a deep valley that then skyrockets in Act 3 to a climactic success. Whereas a more general like rags to riches is going to start below the center line, kind of stay below the center line, and then have a slow climb to the top, right? Or a tragedy is probably going to start a little higher than the middle line. It's going to have an initial hump. Oh, everything's going good. And then we're just going to have a crash all the way down to the bottom. So we can graph these emotional shapes of our vehicle. And again, the emotional shape of our story is our vehicle's growth arc plus the plot, right? Plus the plot beats. That's what creates and the plot is just a string of scenes that take the reader on take the vehicle character on a set of steps. Just like on a vacation, the plot are the places we go. The actual journey is what's happening, the experience we're having as we go those places. Um, Now, for a single vehicle story, this is pretty simple. For a multi-vehicle story, it can get really complicated because let's say one character's having a tragic story and one character's having a rags to riches, or one character is having a tragic story, one character's having a rags to riches, one character's experiencing a hero journey, and then your fourth character is symbolic and their growth arc just looks like a hill, right? It starts low, goes high, comes back low again, right? Like that's the emotional shape. When it gets really complicated is when these multi-vehicle plots occur. So the Dialogue Doctor team, us four coaches, we've come up with 7 different multi-vehicle plot styles. Again, I'm not going to go into detail. This is a coming book, probably in the fall of 2026. How to how to craft an emotional journey. But I'm just going to run through them real quick. So there's the tug of war style. This is when some of your vehicles are having a tragic story and some of your vehicles are having a heroic story. And so one growth arc is on the rise and one growth arc is falling. One character is becoming the best version of themselves and another character is becoming the worst version of themselves. Well, very common in superhero stories, right? Like the hero becomes the best version of themselves and wins the day. The villain becomes the worst version of themselves and loses the day. Um, and it feels like a tug of war, right? Another one is a chain narrative. And this is very common in romance stories where you've got two vehicles. One vehicle, they both need to grow together in order to build the romance, in order to successfully have a relationship, they both need to become the best version of themselves. But often they're out of sync, which means one of them is being the worst version of themselves while one of them is being the best version of themselves. That's why we call it a chain, because the growth plot journey starts to look like a chain where you've got two lines moving in opposition to each other until finally in the end they align. Um, then another one we've talked about is the countdown clock narrative. This is really popular in huge multi-vehicle stories like the Song of Fire and Ice, Game of Thrones, or the Beartown Saga by Bachman. Here we get a world, it's all building to a big climax. So we get a world before, and then there's a trigger event, and then everybody responds to the trigger event with different ways of growth. They all change differently post the trigger event. And then we're building this giant climax, which is like a clock ticking down. And then we see the world after, where everyone's changed and everyone's different. So, for example, in Beartown, we start off seeing this small hockey town. We know there's a clock ticking because there's a giant game coming for the hockey team that's going to decide whether or not the town gets to keep its hockey arena. And then there's a trigger event where a girl is sexually assaulted, and then we see the town, all the characters go into this kind of crazy growth arcs. They're all changing, and then there's a big climax at the game, and then we see the world after post. So amazing. Anything by Bachman? Please go read. So then there's the pass the lead narrative. This is like a Michener book that often will encompass generations, where you have different stories. Or there's a book that came out last year, Rejection, where each section of the book was a different vehicle character, and they overlap in their plots. Like they'll appear in one another's stories, but we always have a single vehicle, and it creates this kind of like passing of the torch for each character. Um, then we have a mosaic narrative. Mosaic narrative is like a collection of short stories that are isolated, but when you put them all together, you look at them all at once, they kind of create a theme or a feeling. So all the stories will kind of be about something, and it creates this mosaic narrative that we're looking at, like a mosaic where it's all built of these little tiles, and then a picture emerges. So in a mosaic narrative, you'll have a whole bunch of stories that are seemingly independent, and then they all come together to form like kind of one image. There's a collage narrative. This is kind of the chaos narrative, where vehicles overlap. There's multiple vehicles. They're happening. They're coming. They're going. Um, I always think of The Godfather, the original Godfather movie, as a collage narrative, because we have like five vehicles. One of them will or last for a little bit and then disappear. And then another one kind of takes over, and then they overlap. Michael's vehicle story kind of lasts the whole way through, but there's actually a big section where Michael just disappears, right? Like, so it's this collage of vehicle stories that usually tell the story of a group of people. Collage narratives are usually focused on a group, like a family or a tribe, something like that. And you go in and out of the members of this group. And then the last one is a perspective loop. This is where you tend to tell the same story over and over again, but you see it from different perspectives. So we get the same story just told from a different perspective over and over again. Super popular in like murder mystery stories, where the detective is interviewing somebody, and you just hear the same story over and over. So we've got all these multi-vehicle plot styles. The idea here again is figuring out, and the key to picking a plot is figuring out which plot is going to best empower your growth arc. Because here's the thing: once you've decided your character potential and your character voice, you can put that character potential and voice in any plot style in any genre, right? You like, let's say I was going from a character who starts as lost and goes to purposeful. That can be a romance, right? Like she can be the lead in a romance where she's lost, and then in order to really appreciate her newfound love, she has to find some purpose and like find some backbone in what she's doing. It can be an adventure, right? Like she feels lost and she's on this journey. Let's say it's like a D&D type journey, and she's gathering a group of people with her. We're doing the heroine's journey. She's gathering a group as she goes to each place, and then at the end of that place, she finds her tribe, and she's found purpose, right? Like, so you once you develop your character, you can then take that character and put them into whatever genre you like, or into whatever plot style you like, because the character comes first. So now that we have our vehicles, and we understand how our vehicles function, and we understand we've brought the plot and the tropes back in to create our emotional shape of the story. Now it's time to start bringing in other cast members and to start deciding who we're putting around this vehicle. And for that, we developed this tool called VEAH, right? Vehicles, engines, anchors, and hazards. Because we want to start classifying all of these other side characters by how they participate in the emotional journey our reader is going on. Right? Like, we don't just want to think like, oh, this is a side character with a quirky personality. No, no, no. How is this side character empowering the emotional journey you're trying to create? So let's go through each one of these real quickly. We've already talked a ton about vehicles. Let's do engines, anchors, and hazards. So engines are characters that inspire positive change from a vehicle. So let me say that again. An engine is a character that inspires positive change in a vehicle, right? So you could think like Sam to Frodo. Sam is Frodo's engine. Frodo is our vehicle. We're following Frodo, taking the ring all the way to Mordor. And along the way, he has this companion who's constantly reminding him of why they're on this mission. And stay true to who you are, Mr. Frodo. Be the best version of yourself, Mr. Frodo, right? Like, we've got this engine that's constantly walking with Frodo. Often, when if we're writing a romance with a single uh, vehicle in the story, like in the movie version of Bridget Jones' Diary, the romance that we want her to have in that movie, it's Colin Firth, is going to be the engine. When she's around that character, she's inspired to be the best version of herself, right? Like, so, and then the reader gets happy when she's with her engine because it's a way that she is inspired to choose to be the best version of herself. Notice I'm using the word inspire. Engines don't make vehicles do anything. Vehicles have to make active choices about what they're doing and who they're going to be, but engines inspire those choices. So there's two types of engines. There's engines that pull. These are engines that mimic who we want our character to become. So if I want my vehicle character to be curious, thoughtful, quirky, and purposeful at the end, I might have an engine that's shy, reserved, and purposeful. So she's going to mimic the trait that I want my vehicle to have. There's also engines that push. These are engines that inspire often by being very different than our vehicle. So an engine that pushes the vehicle I've described might be bubbly, dramatic, and passionate, right? Like, and through her passion, she's going to inspire my vehicle to become purposeful, right? Like, but that's that two types of engines. The other type of character is an anchor. These are characters that inspire vehicles toward negative change. So, if my character, again, if she's going to have a tragedy and she becomes defeated, thoughtful, quirky, and lost, is her like worst version of herself that she's going to transform into, I might have an anchor that pulls, who's cynical, funny, and defeated, and then he's going to pull her down into defeat. Just this week, I wrote an article for the Dialogue Doctor community about the book The Dutch House, which is by Ann Patchett. Amazing book. I was talking about Danny earlier as a vehicle and talking about his third party vehicle. But the character of Danny, the vehicle of Danny that's throughout the book, he has a sister. His sister's an anchor. She's an anchor that pulls. She's the worst version of what Danny might become. And so when she's around, Danny has to strive to kind of not be inspired by her. Um, the other type of anchor is an anchor that pushes. Again, this is an anchor that might be a little different than our vehicle, and their different behavior pushes our vehicle to inspires our vehicle to be the worst version of themselves. So engines, anchors. The third one is hazards. Hazards are characters we're only going to see once, maybe twice in a solid narrative. You see a hazard at the beginning and the end of the book. So, for example, in T.J. Klune's A House on the Cerulean Sea, uh, our vehicle character Linus, it's a single vehicle story, right? Like single vehicle story, emotional journey. We're following Linus the whole time. Uh, at the beginning of the story, we run into his nosy neighbor. She's got a huge personality, and uh, she's like the most nosy. and judgmental of all nosy judgmental neighbors. We see her at the beginning of the story and we see her at the end of the story. She's a hazard character. She doesn't necessarily inspire Linus in either direction. What she does is she's such a big personality, Linus has to react. Right. So that's what a hazard does. There's such a big personality, they have to react. In fact, this week on Wednesday, I'll be writing an article about hazards for the community. I'm going to use the I think I'm going to use the Apple Store worker that appears at the beginning and the end of A Man Called Ove with Friedrich Bachmann, where Ove changes. He encounters this worker at the beginning, trying to get an iPad fixed. Ove finds community. The story, his true need is found family. He finds family, and then he encounters this same Apple Store worker at the end of the book. So we're going to have that. I think we're going to run on that one. I have to go look up those passages again. It's been a long time since I read that book, but that's what I think. But that hazard character forces somebody to swerve. That's the idea. They don't necessarily inspire them in a negative or positive way. They just encourage them to swerve. Okay, so 45 minutes. I'm doing great. That is all the theory, right? That's all the theory. Uh, your character's on an emotional journey. You want to build your vehicle characters first. You want to, the most important thing for you to build is their voice. It's helpful to know their personality, where the voice comes from, and their personality should be aligned with their backstory because of all the things that's happened to them and the way the world views them and the way they view themselves before the story starts. They are these adjectives. That's their personality. And then from their personality, we're going to build their voice. Once we have that, we can bring the plot back. Oh, sorry. No, then we define their potential. What's the best version of themselves and the worst version of themselves. Then we can bring the plot back. Then we think about theme. Sorry, theme first. Oh man, see, this is why this is dangerous to do without practicing. So character potential. Then we use the story hypothesis to make sure all of our characters align so we can get clear, concise themes. Then we bring the plot back with the plot plus the character growth arcs. We get the story shape. That might require us to, like, if we have multiple vehicles, might require us to play with the shape a little bit. We got 7 different styles for that. Then once we have that, we can start thinking about cast and we start building engines and anchors that inspire characters to positive and inspire characters to negative growth. And then we put some hazards in the way just to make it more exciting. They're going to swerve a little bit. That's our theory today. 300 episodes in, that's the theory behind the Dialogue Doctor work. So now, taking a sip of coffee. Now, let's get into mechanics. How we actually do these things on the page. Because it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to actually do it. So, what we're going to talk about now is what we're going to do to build the emotional journey. And I've got 6 tools to start with. We're going to talk about 6 tools you can use. And then I've got 8 dials you can turn to start manipulating your reader's emotional journey. So let's go to it. The first tool we're going to start with, I don't actually have a slide for. The first tool we want to start with is a community. You've probably heard me mention the Dialogue Doctor community a couple times, and I talk about it all the time. So I'm just going to pause here and tell you that writing is not a solo endeavor. Writing is a team sport. And I'm not talking about like, oh, you need an editor, oh, you need a book coach, oh, you need a cover designer. That's not what I mean. That is a team. You do need aspects of those teams, maybe depending on who you are and how much money you have. Like, when I was writing my first books, I was super poor. So I didn't get a team. It was just me and some friends. I did have a team though, because I had friends that read for me, like Laura, who's a coach now. But that was weird diversion. Stay on target. Okay, so yeah, so you got to have a community of writers around you because this is hard. We need people to bounce ideas off of. We need people to share the emotional weight of writing with us. We need people to inspire us to keep going. Ideally, your community is full of a bunch of engines who are going to inspire you to the best version of yourself. You got to have a community. And if you look back at every major writer in history, writers that like did things, they all had a community around them. None of them were alone. Hemingway wasn't alone. He had a whole community of writers with him. C.S. Lewis and Tolkien had the Inklings, right? Like they all have. Dickinson may be the only one, but they. But she's a poet. Poets don't count. I'm just kidding. I love you, poets. I love you. So anyway, I'm trying to be one. It's great. But they all have a community of people around them, inspiring them and encouraging them and urging them forward. So you got to have a community. Get a community. That's the first tool. Second tool is we coach people to start with a dialogue first draft. So eh, your story, the emotions of your journey are conveyed through your character interactions. Say that again. The emotions of your emotional journey, which we're going to talk about in a second with modulation, are conveyed through your character interactions, right? Your character interactions are dialogue. Sometimes they're vocal, sometimes they're nonverbal. But when characters are interacting with each other, it's dialogue, and that's where emotions are conveyed. Prose is where emotions are reflected on. We're going to get to that mechanic in a minute. So, the best way to ensure that you are communicating emotions through your story is to start with a dialogue first draft. What does that mean? It means your first draft looks just like a B, right? I wrote a little silly sample on a slide here, so I'll read it. So my first draft might be like A, did you see that? B, see what? A, that giant dragon thing that just flew over our heads. B, no, I did not. Right? That might be a segment of dialogue in my first draft. Then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to add dialogue tags and body language. Andy pointed to the sky about them. Did you see that? See what? Barry asked as he answered a text message. That giant dragon thing, Andy said, that just flew over our heads. No, I did not, Barry replied, not looking up from his phone. So in my second pass, I'm going to add tags and I'm going to add body language. And in the third pass, I'm going to add reflective prose. Andy pointed to this guy about them. Did you see that? See what? Barry asked as he answered a text message. That giant dragon thing, Andy said, that just flew over our heads. No, I did not, Barry replied, not looking up from his phone. Andy shook his head at Barry. He felt his friend always missed the most amazing things because his head was buried in his phone. Can you tell I was talking to one of my kids when I was putting the slides together? Anyway, so yaka yaka. It's not true. I actually wasn't. So anyway, we want to start with that dialogue first draft and then add uh, tags and body language, and then after that, bring in the reflective prose and descriptions that really start to enhance the texture of what we're writing. You don't always have to do this. This is not a forever tool. If you do this for like 10 to 15 scenes, you're going to start to feel the rhythm of it and you can stop doing it. So, this is more an exercise tool that we use with authors to be like, hey, right now your story is really prose centric and we want to get it dialogue centric. So, let's let's write some dialogue first drafts. Now I still coach writers who still write this way. They just like it. It just becomes a like, yeah, my first draft is going to be dialogue only because it just ensures that character interactions are at the center of my story. Um, our second tool is modulating voices. So this is where we move from the core voice to another emotional voice. So remember, when we built our voice, we built language, topics, body language, syntax, and participation. When we're going to modulate a voice, we're going to change some of those to express emotional change. So the key is to ask, like, all right, if I have a character with a shy personality who sounds this way on the page, they use these words, they talk about these topics, they have this body language, this cadence or syntax, and this participation. What happens when they suddenly feel sad? How does their voice change to express sadness? What happens when they suddenly feel excited? How does their voice change to express excitement? That's what modulating their voice is, right? And it's the reason we do this, and we see that this is the primary way we're going to convey emotional change and character growth in our story. The reason we do it this way is because this is how your brain works in real life. In real life, when somebody gets sad, they start sounding and using body language that's different than how they normally sound or use body language. Or when somebody gets thoughtful, their voice changes. Now, they don't change completely. You start from the core, and then you ask, how does this core voice sound when it's being thoughtful? They don't change, they still sound like themselves, but they modulate a step into that emotion. Modulation is the key tool we use to communicate emotional change in a scene and character change overall. So, when to modulate? Um, when should we be modulating? We should be modulating in every scene. Every scene, there needs to be some level of emotional change, right? So at the scene level, as we're modulating, we're thinking about how does the character feel? Remember, the reader is on a journey with your vehicle character. So how your vehicle character feels is typically how your reader is going to feel. If your vehicle character is sad, the reader's probably going to be sad. If your vehicle character feels victorious, the reader's likely going to feel victorious. It's not a one-to-one. Usually your vehicle's feelings are more heightened than your reader's feelings. Like if your vehicle's super excited, your character, your yeah, if your vehicle character's super excited, your reader's going to feel excited, but not super excited, right? Like because they're not tracking one to one with your vehicle. Sometimes though, if your vehicle character is excited about negative change, then your reader might be hesitant, right? Like so, it's not a one to one, but in every scene, we want some kind of emotional change going on. Um, so, and then we're going to modulate across the whole story to show character growth. So remember, we talked about changing a personality trait to like become a different character at the end of the story. You demonstrate the change in that personality by changing the character voice. Because remember, the character voice is the expression of personality. So as the personality changes, the voice should change too. So through your story, if I'm doing my like curious, thoughtful, quirky, lost vehicle to a curious, thoughtful, quirky, purposeful vehicle throughout the story, I'm going to show signs of purposefulness in scenes, and the reader's going to feel really great because it feels like my character's having positive change. And then in the end, I'm going to have a change to where now the character just is purposeful. And I might have several scenes just to nail that home to the reader that now the character is purposeful. The reader's going to feel great because it's positive change. So we modulate at the scene level, but then we're also thinking about character voice modulation across the entire story to demonstrate character growth. Now, another tool we've developed is called the character wheel tool. This is kind of a cheat sheet for um, tracking your character's voice. So if you're like me, often you're working on multiple stories at a time. Can't help myself. I got two screenplays going right now, and I'm writing season 2 of Nerds. So I can't stop. So a lot of times you have multiple stories going, or maybe you're a fantasy writer and you have 25 vehicles. We're looking at you, George R. R. Martin. Can you please calm down? So maybe you got a lot of vehicles. You got a whole bunch of voices you're tracking. So the character wheel tool is a tool we use to help us track those voices. What we do is we put the voice, the core voice that comes out of our character's starting personality, so wherever the book starts, that's your character's core personality. We're going to take that core voice, we're going to lay it out, lay out the voice, the 5 components of the voice. We're going to put that in the middle of the page. And then off to the sides and kind of a circle around, we're going to put the major modulations the character is going to have. So we might put like, okay, I know they're going to experience this really powerful emotion during the story. I know they're going to experience emotion 2 during the story. And then this is the best version of them, and this is the worst version of them. And then we're just going to write some notes to ourselves about how their voice changes when they're feeling those emotions. Now, I recommend for a lead vehicle, a vehicle that's like is in every, I recommend you do like 4 to 5 modulations, no more. You can drive yourself crazy. You could build a character with like 50 modulations. I recommend 4 to 5 modulations, no more. The rest of them you can just feel out, right? You can just feel out as you do them. Just get the major ones down. For a supporting vehicle, you need like the best and worst version of that vehicle. That's really all you need, right? Like you don't need a ton. Don't overthink this. Don't overplan this because you can spend 3 years planning a character wheel tool and never write. The key is to get the words on the page. This is just a tool to help you remember who your character is, especially if you're a slower writer. Like I usually write a book in a year, but Nerd season 2, because I kept getting distracted, I kept doing other things. JP and I have been working on it for 2 years, so I lose track of the voices, um, which stinks. Like, yeah, it just stinks. So, anyway, that being said, use this character wheel tool to kind of help you figure out where your character's going, where they've been, help you kind of keep that core voice. I'll actually post these on the wall next to where I'm writing. So if I have 3 vehicles, I'll have a character wheel for each vehicle. Just a tool we develop. Another tool we talk about is 5 ways to open a scene. So as we're digging into our scene, there's 5 different ways to open that scene. You can open that scene by stating the theme, and you can talk about the theme when you first get into the scene. Um, this happens in Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. The book opens with the father and mother talking about marriage in their world, right? It opens with a theme. When we open with a theme, it makes the scene very thoughtful, a little more philosophical than other scenes. It's tough to open an action scene by talking about theme. Tough to do. Not impossible, just tough because you're kind of working against what you're trying to accomplish. Another way to open a scene is with scenery, right? Like Stephen King does this a lot. He'll describe the area that the character is in to kind of ramp into the scene. It gives you a real strong sense of presence, but it's also a slower open to a scene. And we'll talk about in a minute the difference between prose and dialogue and what they do, but it's a little bit slower open to a scene. Uh, Now, King gets going pretty quickly. So he'll do like a paragraph or two. I've noticed when I've read his books of like scenery when he opens a description of something or of the location they're in, and then he gets rolling into dialogue really quick. So his books feel very high energy. Um, the next one is conflict. You can open with the conflict by opening by describing the problem that needs to be solved in this scene. It's a high energy way to start a scene. Another one is characters. You can open it by describing who is going to be in the scene. Hemingway does this a lot in The Sun Also Rises. He'll start off by just talking about a character and who that character is and then his interaction with the character. Actually, I don't think he does it a lot. He does it in one of the early chapters that's on my mind right now, but that is with the friend of his that's a boxer. Anyway, doesn't matter. Uh, you can start off by talking about the character, or you can start off by talking about an emotion. Now, talking about an emotion again gives a slower start to a scene. Um, Sorry, talking about a character. I didn't say this. Talking about a character will really ground us in the scene because we feel like we're right in the middle of the action. We're like getting an introduction to the characters that are going to interact. Talking about an emotion at the opening of a scene, again, you're starting with prose, so it's a little bit slower, but it definitely sets a tone that interprets the rest of the scene. So, like the first chapter of Beloved by Toni Morrison, the master, all hail Toni Morrison. A The opening chapter of Beloved starts with the emotion of spite, right? Like, so it starts with this idea of spite. It clouds the initial interaction of Paul D and Sethi because this emotion of spite is hanging over their initial interaction. So, 5 ways to start a scene, different tools that we use to do that. Another tool is dialogue tags we talk about. These can be very controversial, but when we're coaching writers, we'll always talk about dialogue tags. This is a strategic tool. So using dialogue tags strategically. Again, I just have a couple samples here. I'll read them real quick. You can put them at the beginning, the end, or the middle, and where you put a dialogue tag can interpret how the reader imagines that utterance. So, for example, putting it at the end, use your dialogue tag strategically, or I'll bop you in the nose with my red pen, he said with a grin, right? Putting it at the end keeps the utterance moving, kind of makes it as an afterthought, and it doesn't really conflict with the utterance itself. The vocalization becomes the primary focus. If we put it at the beginning, it makes the utterance sound more thoughtful and a little more hesitant, like it makes it feel like there's a pause before the character spoke. Ben said with a grin, use your dialogue text strategically or I'll bop you in the nose with my red pen. Can you feel how that changes the feeling of the utterance a little bit? Or if I put it in the middle, it will usually emphasize the end of the utterance. Use your dialogue text strategically, Ben said with a grin, or I'll bop you on the nose with my red pen. So this is a way that you can like manipulate how your character sounds to the reader. Dialogue tags also allow us to um, shape a character voice. Maybe you say, hey, part of the syntax of my character is that the dialogue tag always comes at the beginning. It's going to make that character sound more hesitant or thoughtful. So, anyway, dialogue tags are tools. So, tools we've covered so far before I get into the dials you have. Dialogue tags, we've talked about opening scenes. We've talked about building a character wheel. We've talked about modulation at the scene level and the character growth level. And we've talked about writing a dialogue first draft, and we've talked about your need for community. So now let's talk about if we have all those tools and we have all that theory, there's 8 dials we can use to shape our reader's emotional journey. I'm going to go through all of 8 of these quickly. I'm not going to dwell a ton on them because I'm already an hour, 10 minutes in, and some people have already turned me off, but now they're sad because I'm getting to the real meat of what it's like to write. Anyway, they're not sad because they don't know, but you and I can revel in their sadness because they turned me off. All right, so um, the 8 dials were used to craft an emotional journey. The first dial I call the scene architectural dial. This is dialogue versus prose, because remember, dialogue is characters interacting. Prose is things like description, summaries, or third person reflections, or reflections from a third party narrator, right? Like that all counts as prose. Usually comes in the form of a paragraph, right? We see it in like paragraph shape. So dialogue on the one side of this dial creates energy and feels faster to the reader. It creates the speed to the reader. It builds energy as they read it. Prose on the other side helps us reflect and slows it down. So you have this dial you can turn to shape the reader's experience of a scene. Dial number 2 is cast size. One-on-one conversations feel more intimate. 2 characters in a scene feel more intimate than 3 to 5 characters in a scene, which has a larger energy to it and a bigger build to it as the characters all bounce off of one another. Solo scenes feel completely different too. A solo scene feels ponderous a little bit and can feel very reflective and internal. So the number of cast members you're putting into a scene impacts how that scene feels to the reader, right? You can turn that dial to have cast members. Now, you can get all the way up to like a chorus scene where you've got like 3 characters and then a chorus of people, like a whole classroom, like All Summers in a Day by Ray Bradbury. There's the teacher, a student, the main vehicle student, another uh, character, an anchor student, and then the chorus of students that all kind of speak with one voice, right? Like, in fact, that's an excellent illustration of a chorus character because it actually starts off with the choruses just speaking in the kind of a black box. We don't know where they are. We don't know what's going on. We just hear the chorus's voice. So if you want to understand a chorus character, go check out All Summers in a Day by Ray Bradbury. But we get that the cast size can even get to the place of feeling chaotic if you turn that down to too big a cast in a scene. Um, the character pressure dial. This is where we bring in our engines and anchors, right? Engines take the pressure off the reader because there's side characters there encouraging our vehicle to the best version of themselves. Like when Sam is around Frodo, we're like, okay, Frodo's going to be okay. This is hard, but Frodo's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. This journey is going to be okay. But if we bring in the anchor of Gollum around Frodo, all of a sudden we're like, I don't like it. I don't like this pressure. It's feeling intense. Gollum's going to make Frodo make bad decisions. Why does Frodo suddenly sound like Gollum? Why is Gollum an ankle it pulls? It makes me uncomfortable. So you can turn the reader's experience based on this dial of the characters you put in. Next character is the segment length dial. So segment is a topic or emotional tone within a dialogue scene. So if you've got your scene, it's broken into segments of what they're talking about or the emotional tone the characters have. Uh, Short segments feel energetic. You feel like you're covering a lot of ground. You're really moving. Long segments are great for deeper emotions. So if you want a deeper emotion, you want to dwell in the topic or the emotional tone longer than if you want a shorter segment. Um, the utterance complexity dial. So we talked about an utterance and how you can add the tags in a different place. There's actually multiple components to an utterance. There's body language, there's the vocalization, there's the tag, and there's even an inner thought if you're doing like first person or third person close. So that utterance complexity dial, more complex utterances add emotional weight, and you sit longer in the emotion of that utterance. Light utterances that like are maybe just the vocalization feel poppy and quick, and they don't have that emotional weight. Another dial you can turn. Location of conflict dial. So if the conflict comes very early in the scene's going to feel intense. If the conflict comes later in the scene's going to give you all this space. It's going to feel a little more relaxed. So where you place the conflict that the characters are working through in the scene determines how the scene feels, right? Dial number 7 is the modulation speed dial. If your characters modulate really, really fast, so let's say there's a jump scare, it makes the scene feel one way. If your characters modulate really slowly, it makes the scene feel another way to the reader. So this is just another dial you can turn based on the tools we have. And then finally, modulation size dial. So if the modulation is a giant modulation, we're probably going to have to take multiple steps to it. So let's say you want to write a scene where your character's devastated. They can't just be devastated. You have to build to that devastation. They need to be troubled, they need to be hurt, and then they can be devastated. So we're just building a huge modulation. It's going to have one feel. Whereas if we just want a small modulation, like the character's going to be thoughtful, right? Like we can just go straight to thoughtful, right? Like so that's a small modulation. So that dial. But I know I went through these fast. Again, this is like its own hour and a half talk. But you have these, what I want you to walk away with is you have these dials you can turn. If you know the tools and you know the theory, you can then manipulate the tools and the theory to take the reader on the emotional journey you want to have. You can craft each scene to give them a specific emotional experience. And that's what's behind the Dialogue Doctor DNA, right? That's one of the reasons we call ourselves coaches and not editors. An editor tends to have an idea of what a book should be, and they apply that idea to your work. So, if you're writing a romance, you might go find a romance editor who knows what a romance is supposed to be. They're going to take that stereotype of a romance and apply it to your work. We're not editors, we're coaches. We don't want to shape your work. We want to help you bring out the book that you are dreaming of and want to create, right? I'm not going to tell you, I say this to clients all the time. I was working with somebody today and they ask, is that right? And I said, there's no right, there's no wrong, there's what do you want? This is the way you're turning the dials in this scene. This is what the reader is feeling because of how you're turning the dials. Is that what you want? Right? And people fight with me. They'll be like, no, no, there's a right way to do grammar. There's not. Go read Blindness by Jose Saramago. He's got no punctuation in the whole freaking book. And it's amazing. Scariest book I ever read. It's amazing, right? There are no rules. There's just the emotional journey you're crafting for the reader and the tools you have to create that journey. Um, so I've gone through a lot. This is the Dialogue Dr. DNA. 300 episodes. This is where we are. And we're not done, right? We're still building tools. We're still developing theories. In fact, as I was just talking to these dials, I thought of one more. So we're constantly building tools and theories. And listening to the podcast is one way to get those, but there's other ways to engage with those tools and theories. One is you can find more by joining the community. So if you go to dialoguedoctor.com and click on the community button in the menu, or you go to patreon.com/Jeff Elkins, ELKINS, uh, you can join the community for as little as $5 a month. You can join. Community members get a weekly writing prompt from me that's designed to help work these tools. The writing prompts are designed as exercises to help you practice these tools. I'm writing weekly articles on craft, on what it means to be a writer, and there's always a challenge involved with those. I do a bonus podcast episode every week where I just kind of get nitty gritty about learning stuff. And as we're developing these tools, the people that listen to the bonus podcast episodes literally hear me working these out. They'll hear me talk about these. We talk about we you get 10% off of every events. We haven't done events for a couple years, but we're bringing events back in 2026. So you're going to want to participate in some of those master classes. We're going to do some masterminds that are like 8 weeks long, and I'm hoping we can actually hold like a big community event in 2026. So you'll get 10% off of that by being part of the community. We do twice a month Zoom calls that are learning calls. Like we've got one coming up this tomorrow, actually, from me recording this, in which we're going to talk about the novel The Client by John Grisham. First novel I ever read as a kid. Pretty pumped to talk about it. We have a community Slack group where you can interact with other Slack members. You can also subscribe to monthly coaching with one of our coaches. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I love these tools, I want to apply this, but it feels like so much to apply, come and get some coaching. You can subscribe to a monthly meeting with a coach, or you can subscribe to a weekly meeting with a coach. And it's not indefinite, right? Like you can be like, okay, I'm going to do this for 2 months and then I'm going to turn it off. It's great. You can totally do that. We all have availability listed in the Patreon. You can come and find us there. Another way to engage, if you're like, I don't have time for a community, I don't want to do that, then you can just grab our books, right? Like we have 3 books published right now. I mentioned The Story Hypothesis by James P. Rindfleisch the Ninth. Please go get that. The primer book for the community that covers most of the theory I talked about today is The Dialogue Doctor Will See You Now. I also wrote a book of 50 very strategic exercises that help you improve your writing based on what we've talked about today, based on the Dialogue Doctor DNA. They just push you to improve. And that's called The Dialogue Doctor Says Take One Per Day for 50 days. And then here's the big announcement of the 300th episode. Uh, when this episode releases, this will be up for pre-order on Amazon. That last section I talked about with the 10 dials, that's actually a new book I've just wrote that you can it's going to be released in late January of 2026. You can go pre-order it now. It's called The Dialogue Doctor and All the Magical Dials of Emotional Mastery, controlling your pacing, intensity, and resonance of your scenes. So go pre-order that book. Um, all right. We did it. We got through everything. Thank you for being on this journey with me. Thank you for being a part of this. And I got to say, we're just getting started, right? 5.5 years in, and I feel like we're just getting started. So it's great to have you here. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.